Hello, and welcome to the new episode of Dakota Boys Talk Movies. I'm Steven.
And I am Dakota.
And we're finally doing something we've promised since we started this podcast. It only took us, how long have we been doing this podcast? Like, since March?
5 months?
Yeah, something like that. Well, no, March is the third month, and we're in the 11th. Dang, we've been doing this like 8 months. Good for us. So anyway.
Some of you were like, wow.
I
didn't think you'd be doing this for 2 months.
I didn't think we'd do 2 weeks, but something we've been kind of wanting to eventually do is something we're now doing in this episode, and that's doing some movies that you either miss in theaters for whatever reason, whether limited release causing it to not, go to places that aren't New York or California, or sometimes you just don't go to movies theaters just because you're like, I'll just wait to rent it, or something like that, or it comes out the same weekend as a blockbuster, like the one we're talking about today. Had two of those things. Came out the same weekend as a blockbuster, and you only got a chance to see it in theaters if it came to your location, which where we live, it didn't come to our location. And so we're going to be doing a video review. Do people say video anymore?
I think they just say a DVD review.
Is DVD old now?
Yes.
Crazy.
We saw this movie on DVD.
We watched it on DVD. We could have watched it on Blu-ray, but we didn't. But yeah, so a home viewing review of Mr. Holmes, starring Ian Mckellen.
His name is Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Was that him?
My mother, she wonders if you have brought your famous hat.
The dear stalker. I've never worn one.
And a pipe.
I prefer a cigar.
Did you do the thing?
What's
The cane shows the marks of a dog's teeth. The wood is from an island southwest of Madeira. That thing.
That was an embellishment of Dr. Watson. If I ever write a story myself, it will be to correct the myriad misconceptions created by his imaginative license.
Murder, Mr. Calmont. Murder.
I didn't know you wrote stories.
I decided to get it right before I die.
You're not going to die. I had a great uncle who lived to be 102.
What are the odds that you would know two men who would live that long?
Well, I didn't actually know him. We're about to start an investigation.
And basically what the premise of this movie is it's Sherlock Holmes in his 90s. It takes place in the year 1947, and he hasn't had a case in 35 years, and he's basically starting to get he's getting senile dementia problems because he's getting old. There's still sparks of moments where he still has his observant thing that that Sherlock Holmes has, where he notices things and do things like that. But as far as remembering cases from the past, he's really struggling and trying to find ways to do that because he's basically having trouble remembering his final case, and he wants to because he went to a movie version of it. It gets a little... this takes place in a world where, he's a celebrity because of Watson writing the stories about him. And so he decides to go to a movie version they did in kind of a 40s version of one of his last case, but he found it almost laughable because of, they were doing the, it involves murder. And, he just thought it was laughable. However, it was like these, anything that had to do with a big twist or something was said with an exclamation, and he jokes about how there was a twirling of the mustache whenever there was like, and the game is on, or something. And but the problem is he
can't remember the
case. Can't remember the case well enough to go back and go, because he knew that wasn't right, because he was like, that's just too ridiculous. And so he's determined to remember his last case for himself and write it down, and that's kind of what this story is. And so it's how did you feel about the jumping of this movie, Dakota? Because it kind of, you're in 1947 with him, but it jumps back to 35 years previous. And then there's also like a couple weeks before, jumping a little bit too at times.
Yeah, this movie definitely jumps around, and it kind of catches you a little bit because you're like, wait a minute, what's going on? His brother just died? Then you're like, no, this is in the past.
Yes.
And that's how he got to the point he is at now.
Yeah. And it's interesting it's kind of a, Ian McKellen plays him, and he was definitely what you'd expect in this movie. The high point of this movie is Ian McKellen's portrayal of Sherlock Holmes, but he's playing a completely different Sherlock Holmes than I've ever seen before by any of them. And I think, and obviously part of that is that he's an old Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
And he's a lot more introspective. Is that the right word? Like, he seems to be more contemplative and things like that. And you realize that it probably has to do with this case that he's trying to figure out. And because he knows there has to be something about this case, because he's thinking, why was this the last case I had and never worked on another case again? And so you're kind of following his solving of a case he had already apparently solved, you think, although you're not sure with that either. And so it's kind of interesting, but there's also a relationship. Laura Linney plays his housekeeper, and then she has a son who's probably, what do you think, 10?
Yeah, let's go with 10.
I was like, yeah, it's probably 10, somewhere in there. And this kid is totally intrigued with Sherlock Holmes, and just kind of looks at him as like this like cool idol, like, wow, this guy is the guy, and maybe this boy even seems to have an interest in maybe being like Sherlock Holmes. But the problem is that Sherlock Holmes isn't really like Sherlock Holmes anymore, and this boy is trying to spark the old Sherlock Holmes alive a little bit. And there's a really good chemistry. I thought the chemistry between him and that boy was really good. And I think some of that is you can chalk up to just Ian McKellen, being able to convey his part well.
Oh, man, Ian McKellen was definitely on point in this movie, because we all know Ian McKellen's older, but he's not like a stereotypical old man.
Yeah, he's playing a 92-year-old for most of this movie, but in reality he's probably, 70-something?
Yeah, he's in his 70s, and the scenes where he's old Sherlock, it's just, you totally buy it. You buy him as kind of a senile old man, way past his prime, just like on the very verge of senility, and you're just like,
if not into senility.
Yeah, and you just kind of feel sorry for him, but at the same time, he's like trying to, like he says in the movie, he says, we found the problem, we just got to figure out the solution. He's trying to jog his memory, using a few things to try to bring back his memories.
Yeah, he goes on the hunt for some different kind of remedies that he thinks will maybe reduce his senility or bring him back to the old Sherlock Holmes, even if only for an hour or something, just enough to work on the case. But it's just a matter of, are any of those things actually working? What I like to point out too is that so many people were kind of harsh on Ian McKellen's performance as Sherlock in this, just because they're like, oh, this isn't how Sherlock Holmes is supposed to be, because he seems to care too much. Because Sherlock Holmes was almost like so much of an introvert and antisocial that he didn't seem to care about anything or anybody. But I think why it's different in this movie is that he could still have been that Sherlock Holmes, and I think we still see moments where he is that Sherlock Holmes, whether it's a flashback or even in his old age. But I think some of that is the fact that his dementia is plaguing him, I think that's maybe what's causing his personality to be different than what we're used to. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
Dakota?
Well, plus the fact that, there's a lot of people who kind of just soften with age. And this is a Sherlock Holmes that just has a ton of regrets.
Yeah.
And
well, and I think that's some of it. I think he's in a place now where he is able to see the mistakes as mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's changing him too. Or changed him to be different than the Benedict Cumberbatch one that people know now, or the Robert Downey Jr. one from the Guy Ritchie movies and things like that.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the tough part about this movie. It's coming out at a time when we've had 3 different actors kind of give their spin on Sherlock Holmes. You have the 2 TV versions, and then Robert Downey's
That's
version.
right. There's the CBS show Elementary.
Yeah, with Johnny Lee Miller.
That's right. So yeah, that it does change it, but I think just in their approach to this movie helped you not. I mean, obviously, there's always going to be somebody who will point to those, but in watching this, and just based on the way of going at it, probably even Sir Ian McKellen's performance, it's not like you're sitting there the whole time like trying to make this fit into one of those timelines of, it'd be hard to fit this into the timeline of the Benedict Cumberbatch one just because it's a modern day. But even trying to fit into the timeline of, like, making him feel like an old Robert Downey Jr. or something, you don't feel that in this movie. It just feels like its own kind of standalone, one-off type story where that doesn't really play into this. But, yeah, I guess number one, performances. I don't know, how'd you feel about? I mean, obviously, Ian McKellen did an outstanding job in his performance in this, but how'd you feel about other performances in this?
Well, I thought everyone else was okay. I mean, there's not really many actors in this movie, but there's definitely not a weak spot in any other performances.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, easily, this movie hinged on Ian McKellen, the other, and probably the boy Roger. Just, I mean, if Ian McKellen didn't work, and if Ian McKellen and Roger and Milo Parker, if Holmes and Rogers' relationship didn't work, nothing would have worked. This movie would have been just ridiculous, just dumb, or whatever. And so yeah, I mean, all that's fine because like Dakota pointed out, every other performance in this wasn't large enough to really. It had such small amount of screen time that it didn't really matter too much. Like they weren't showcased enough to really screw it up or anything like that. But I guess as far as story, as we talked about, this story was kind of I don't know if it's unique so much as just kind of. How did you feel about the whole? You had this 1947 story, the jumping back 35 years story, and the little bit of going back a few weeks to when he was off trying to find a medicinal remedy. How did you feel about how all that story stuff played out? Not even so much the story itself as how the director Bill Condon made that all kind of work.
It all worked pretty well, I thought. There's definitely not any moments in this film where the story's lagging or it's just trying to get through to the other part or it doesn't get bogged down or anything like that.
It never got bogged down. I think my warning to anyone out there who may be interested in this movie is, first off, if the only interpretation you want or like of Sherlock Holmes you've ever seen is like Robert Downey Jr. or something, you're not gonna like this.
Yeah.
And my other warning would be just to remember that this isn't. I mean, this is meant to be a paced drama. I mean, that's what it is. It's a paced drama. So go into that knowing that this isn't going to be like flash, 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 and jump here and chase scene here and insert, whatever here. I mean, this is a plot, I don't know, plotting's the right word. Although in spots I would say, maybe this was a little slower than it needed to be. It was a little slower than it needed to be, but it is just a paced drama. So you need to know that going in, or it's going to really like, what is this? If you're not prepared for that. That's how I always am with like slower dramas. Like, I don't mind them as long as I'm realizing that's what I'm going to be watching, or I might get like sleepy or agitated. but yeah, and that would be my one.
Well, thankfully this wasn't a very long movie.
No, it's under 2 hours. It's like an hour and 40 minutes long, and so yeah, like Dakota said, every scene mattered. There were a few spots where like you kind of had to fill in the blanks, which I'm okay with in movies as long as they're not like totally taking advantage of you filling in things that there's no idea you would know about. Sometimes that happens in movies where you're like, what the heck just happened? And then you go to special features and you find out there's a deleted scene that makes that scene make sense. That didn't happen so much in this movie. It's just this little spots where it was like, okay, I guess I'll just fill in the blank on that, or something like that. But it wasn't too bad. But yeah, I guess my only drawback of this movie is there are just aspects of the story that I don't know. I was trying to decide how I felt about the way they. I mean, the only way this story made sense, though, was to jump back, because that's the whole point of what the old Sherlock Holmes is doing, and for the most part, I thought that worked. But at the same time, I felt like this is one of those movies where Ian McKellen's performance is still what sticks out in it more than anything. Like, it's one of those movies where I could see his performance being nominated for awards, but nothing else of this movie being nominated for awards or anything like that. And so that's kind of what's interesting about this movie. Is it's a pretty low key, quiet movie, but
what this movie kind of reminded me of is this is kind of how A&E used to make movies back, when they made movies and not horrible reality TV shows.
You're right, and I did notice that one of the backers of this movie is BBC Films.
Yeah.
Is like, this did feel like a higher quality PBS movie or something, or something that BBC would put out, and it is something BBC put out, kind of. But yeah, it was just kind of a real low key type, and it was based on a novel called A Slight Trick. What was it? A Slight Trick of the Mind?
Yeah.
A Slight Trick of Mind, written by Mitch Cullen, I believe was his name. And Mitch Cullen. And in fact, they were going to call it A Slight Trick of the Mind. They were going to just call it the name of the novel, and then they realized that calling it Mr. Holmes might be a little simpler for people to just go, oh, it's about Sherlock Holmes, I'll go to it then. And so they just decided to kind of shorten that up. But it's just interesting to kind of jump into this and see a Sherlock Holmes that's living in a post-war world, because certain aspects of what happened in World War II come up, like Laura Linney's character references VE Day, and what does she say to her son about turning the lights out.
Oh, it's lights out like the Blitz.
Yeah, lights out like the Blitz is when she tells him he needs to go to sleep. And, there's like these little kind of references to the fact that this is a post-war world. And I thought certain dialogue like that really helped you kind of feel like you're in that place. You're in that time period. And so as far as that goes, the look of the movie was quite good too. But like I said, this was directed by Bill Condon, and that's kind of, I think, what he does mostly. I mean, what he's known for. Well, as of late, like, he directed one of the Twilight movies. Like, he directed Breaking Dawn, which feels kind of out of place in his filmography.
Well, sometimes we all just need that paycheck, man.
Yeah. Yeah, because he directed Breaking Dawn Part 1 and Breaking Dawn Part 2, but after that he directed that Fifth Estate movie, which kind of got a little mixed, and so it seems like lately he's been a little
hit and
miss, but he kind of comes off of a few other movies that had some Oscar wins for, interestingly enough, acting. Like he directed Dreamgirls.
Yeah, that I remember.
And he directed Gods and Monsters, which got some acting awards. So, in fact,
yeah, Ian McKellen was in that one too.
Yeah, Ian McKellen was in it, but what I was gonna say was Ian McKellen was nominated for Gods and Monsters. He didn't win for that one either. It's just kind of interesting how Bill Condon might have directed Ian McKellen in another possible, because I could see this being nominated for his acting.
I think that's kind of what happened with Gods and Monsters, wasn't it? It was pretty much just his performance in that movie was like the one thing that stood out. Of course, everybody was talking about it, but it was just one of those movies that...
Yeah, it was not. It won the Oscar for writing,
and I remember.
but then it was nominated just for actor and actress.
Yeah, I remember Brendan Fraser was in it, and everyone was like, "Oh wow, he can actually act." And then I think it was Vanessa Redgrave.
Lynn Redgrave.
Lynn Redgrave, yeah, was the housekeeper in there. That got nominated for her role, but
yeah, it just seems like if you took the Twilight movies out of his filmography, it seems like he's a guy who directs actors, and they're the ones that seem to get noticed most in the movies, in terms of getting the award attention type things. But there's not much else to say about this movie other than it's just kind of an interesting portrayal of seeing Sherlock Holmes in a different light than a lot of times when you see him, whether it's the guy with the pipe and the deerstalker hat going down like they do in some movies, or to see the drug-abusing kung fu version that Robert Downey did, or to see the modern-day eccentric that Benedict Cumberbatch plays. So it's just interesting to see kind of this take in this version and see where it goes. This isn't a movie that's going to be for everybody. I mean, this movie was barely for me. I think what kept me intrigued was just that I enjoy Sherlock Holmes things. And so it kept me intrigued. I don't mind the little dramas that maybe have a little bit of touch of mystery to them. And so I found it interesting. But obviously, if you're into just kind of smaller dramas and especially Sherlock Holmes, this is one that I would say is worth checking out. As of us filming this podcast, it just recently came out on video or digital or however you happen to rent or watch things, and so it is available. It's everywhere. It's in red boxes. It's on the Vudu type things as well as anywhere else you'd get stuff. So it's there if you'd like to see it. Dakota, any other thoughts on it?
Not really. I'm just gonna recommend that you see this maybe on a lazy Sunday afternoon when you don't have anything going on.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those movies where you don't regret seeing it, but it's not like take your breath away material either. But yeah, definitely interesting and worth a watch. So, if anything, just to see a really great performance from Ian McKellen. and so he was just. I thought his transition between being kind of more of a sharp Sherlock to being a senile Sherlock was pretty seamless, and
You know something?
it didn't seem like he's overacting either of those.
I just thought of this. I wonder if he got tips from his good buddy Patrick Stewart. Because in the last episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, he had to do that. Or he had to play the younger version of himself, the current version of himself, and then a senile old raving man.
I thought you meant like something about getting Sherlock Holmes advice, because Ian McKellen's worked with people who've been involved in Sherlock Holmes things. Like, he's good friends with Derek Jacobi, and he worked with Christopher Lee, and all those guys.
Yeah,
all those guys have been involved in different aspects of Sherlock Holmes things, and so. But yeah, I guess that aspect. Yeah, because him and Patrick Stewart are pretty good buds too.
Yeah, they're besties or some jazz.
Yeah. I think his ultimate bestie, though, Ian McKellen's, is Derek Jacobi. But yeah, he's besties with Pat Stew also, I guess. But
Pat Stew's the current favorite.
there you go.
He's in the running.
He's in, yeah. They're just enemies on film, or well, we don't do film anymore. Just enemies on screen.
There you go.
So anyway, so that's our video review of Mr. Holmes is what it's called. Like I said, starring Ian McKellen. And yeah, like I said, it just came out, so check it out. Speaking of check out, we are on Facebook. Like us on there, keep up on things. You know, definitely subscribe to us on YouTube or iTunes, one of those things. Rate and review things. We're in those places. So hopefully you're keeping up with us on those things. And we'd appreciate it.
All right, well, now that that's out of the way.
Oh, and I was going to remind you, too, that I called out in our... I'm blanking out. Was it the Bridge of Spies episode about the next person that does that we can see them review us? We'll give them a shout out on the show. So I'm looking for that. So go ahead and do that. We'll call you out, give you a shout out. I guess would be the more proper way to do that. So hopefully you do those things.
All right. Well, should we go ahead and just close out this thing with some little bit of movie news?
Yes, we should probably do a little bit of movie news. We usually just at the beginning. And probably about 5 minutes into talking about Mr. Holmes, I realized that I totally glossed over it. So. Oh,
man, you just wanted to get this movie out of your system.
I just got so excited. No. Yeah, there was just a few things we noticed in the news this week. First off, one of them was, probably many of you heard about it because it became a social media movement, was that hashtag Force for Daniel, where that terminally ill man was... trying to see Force Awakens before it came out because of the fact that he could die. He did get to see it, and then a few days later, he passed away just recently here. So he Disney fulfilled his wish, and now he did pass away. So kind of a somber, sad note there that he did end up.
Very bittersweet moment there.
Yeah, a little bittersweet, but his family was really thankful to Disney for allowing him to have that kind of final wish that he had. And so that was cool that Disney did that, I think, with a little bit of the push of Mark Hamill, Peter Mayhew, and John Boyega, a few of the stars of Star Wars, but they did do it. But yeah, he did his cancer. He just had a really aggressive form of cancer, and so that's kind of a, like Dakota said, kind of bittersweet. But another thing that's kind of bittersweet, maybe just more bitter, is...
brace yourselves, Gem and the Hologram fans.
Yeah. So Gem and the Holograms was only in theater two weeks, and apparently it was just doing so poorly, the studio just pulled it. Like, completely pulled it.
Yep. So if you were hoping to see that this weekend at your local Cinemaplex...
Which you probably weren't, because nobody wanted to see it. Not even the people who like Gem and the Holograms back in the day, because this movie had nothing to do with the Gem and the Holograms they loved. They just pulled it. In fact, another one that got pulled was Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
They pulled it, not completely, but they pulled it from 2,000 theaters.
That one actually shocked me because I did see that movie, and I thought that was another movie.
You were the one person who went to it, Dakota. Good for you.
Hey, there was like 8 people in the theater, okay?
On opening night, right?
I was not alone, okay?
Actually, you were alone. No,
actually, I think that dropped down to 6, really, but because the people behind me disappeared like halfway through the movie.
Whoa, TMI.
But yeah, that's just, I thought that is also one of those movies just very actor driven, not big on story, dialogue, well, tons of dialogue, but it just came down to pretty much Michael Fassbender, Kate Winslet, Seth Rogen.
An Aaron Sorkin movie that was character driven?
Yeah.
And dialogue driven? That's crazy.
That's probably why nobody went to see it.
They still have the taste of Newsroom in there.
Everybody sent that one friend in to be the canary.
And the canary died.
Afterwards, they sent out that tweet, horrible movie, don't see it.
Yeah.
Whereas I told nobody.
You just kept it to yourself. Yeah. And another thing that dropped that was kind of like, was they did drop the trailer for Warcraft based on the very, very popular, mostly online game, the World of Warcraft.
You say popular, but I think that's a myth.
Well, I think it was popular, for a while, because there's a lot of people played it, but I don't know quite how popular it is anymore.
I think it gained traction, or I think it gave off the illusion of popularity a few years ago when they had all those celebrities with their commercials talking about how much they love the game. You had Chuck Norris.
Yeah, who else did they have? There was
Mr. T.
Mr. T, yeah.
And that one girl from Parks and Rec that show you love so much.
Which girl from Parks and Rec?
The one that was in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I can't even remember her name.
Aubrey. No, shit.
Yeah, it's Aubrey Plaza.
She was in that? Okay.
She pretty much reprised her character from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Yeah.
So she just acted like Wednesday Addams?
Yeah.
Because that's basically how she acts. Okay, yeah. Well, anyway, that trailer dropped, and it was kind of like, I don't know. It just...
Mostly what I heard was, they're making a movie for that game? What?
Well, it's been being talked about for years, and they've been, it started filming like a year ago. But, yeah, it's finally coming out next summer. And, yeah, I don't know.
Be prepared to be underwhelmed.
Honestly, yeah, they're trying to make it look like this big fantasy epic, but sadly, the trailer should be the thing. Usually what happens is you get super teased with the trailer, and then you go in and get totally let down by the movie, but this is like, they have an underwhelming trailer, which usually isn't a good sign, because usually an underwhelming trailer, especially a trailer that isn't meant to be underwhelming. This wasn't meant to be a low-key trailer, so I was like, no. So anyway, there was that.
Wouldn't that be just completely ironic if Batman vs. Man of Steel, Captain America, Civil War, and all those other big movies just bombed, and this one actually was the best of the bunch?
Hey, if there's multiple universes, it could happen in one of those. Oh man,
one where they made a better movie, I guess. That's not this one.
Oh man,
I guess I shouldn't be criticizing it too much. We should wait and see. But I'm calling it now. I'm calling it.
This is one of those where it feels safe to call. But anyway, yeah, so there's just some of the news things that kind of caught our fancy. And yeah, so sorry this is at the end. Glad you stuck around. But again, just remember to check us out on Facebook, iTunes, those things. And definitely, if you're interested in Mr. Holmes at all, definitely check it out. We both give it a soft recommend.
Yeah.
I'm not going to strongly recommend it, but definitely a soft recommend. And so, yeah, so I think with that, we'll just go ahead and wrap up the show. So, yeah, this is Steven.
And this is Dakota.
And the game is off.